My name is Grayson Dixon. I am 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents stood up at their 40th wedding anniversary dinner and announced to 30 guests. We are taking the whole family to Hawaii next week for another celebration. Everyone clapped. My sister-in-law squealed with excitement. I smiled, already imagining palm trees and ocean breezes. My first real vacation in years. Then I made the mistake of asking a simple question. What time is our flight? My father looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. My mother's smile tightened. And in front of every guest in that room, my dad said, "You don't need to know, Grayson. You aren't part of this trip. Someone has to stay behind and take care of the kids." 30 pairs of eyes. 30 witnesses to the moment my family told me I wasn't really family at all. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, to understand why I walked away from everything I knew, let me take you back to the hours before that humiliation. The day started like every other major event in the Dixon household, with me working and everyone else watching. I arrived at my parents' house in the suburbs of Boston at 8 a.m. Their house is one of those sprawling colonials with white pillars and a lawn that looks like it was cut with fingernail scissors. It screams old money, even though my father, Harold, has been retired for 5 years and spends most of his time guarding his retirement fund like a hawk. I pulled my 10-year-old sedan up to the curb. I knew better than to park in the driveway. That space was reserved. Always reserved. Sure enough, right in the center of the paved circle sat a brand new, jet black Porsche Cayenne. It belonged to my younger brother, Mason. Or, more accurately, the bank owned it and Mason paid the lease with money I knew he didn't really have. I walked into the kitchen through the side door. My mother, Patricia, didn't say hello. She pointed at a stack of silverware on the island. "Grayson, finally. The caterers are running late with the appetizers. I need you to polish these. I found a spot on a fork earlier." It was embarrassing. "Good morning to you too, Mom," I said, putting down my bag. She didn't look up from her clipboard. "And after that, check the wine glasses. Elena wants the crystal, not the everyday glass. Make sure it's the Waterford set." Elena is Mason's wife. She isn't a Dixon by blood, but she fits into this family better than I ever did. She's demanding, loud, and obsessed with status. For the next 6 hours, I didn't sit down. I polished silver until my fingers smelled like metal paste. I arranged flowers because the florist didn't understand Patricia's vision. I moved furniture to create a dance floor in the living room. At one point, Mason walked in. He was wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than my car insurance payment. He held a tumbler of scotch, ice clinking against the glass. "Hey, Gray," he said, leaning against the counter I had just scrubbed. "Beer is getting a little warm in the cooler out back. You might want to throw some ice on it." He didn't offer to help. He didn't ask how I was. He just gave an order and took a sip of his drink. "I'll get to it, Mason," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm just finishing up the centerpieces Mom wanted." "Great. Thanks, buddy." He patted my shoulder with a condescending rhythm. Pat, 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 and walked out to the patio to laugh with our father. This was the dynamic. It had always been the dynamic. Mason was the golden child, the entrepreneur who always had a new investment scheme. I was Grayson, the accountant, the guy who did the math, the guy who made things work behind the scenes. Reliable, boring, invisible. By 6 p.m., the guests started arriving. These were people my parents had known for decades. Neighbors, old business partners, church friends. People who judged your worth by the car in your driveway and the label on your suit. I had changed into a simple black button-down and slacks. I looked presentable, but apparently not enough to be a guest. "Grayson," my mother hissed, pulling me into the pantry as I was bringing out a tray of shrimp cocktails. "Try to blend in. Don't hover near the guests unless you're offering them wine. We don't want to crowd the room." "I'm your son, Mom," I said, a little sharper than I intended. "I'm not the hired help." She adjusted her pearl necklace, her eyes cold. Then stop acting like a martyr and make yourself useful. Elena needs help with the kids. Sophie is crying in the den. I swallowed my anger. I went to the den. My niece, Sophie, 4 years old, and my nephew, Oliver, 6, were currently destroying a pile of expensive cushions. Elena was standing in the doorway, holding a glass of Chardonnay, looking annoyed. "Finally," she said when she saw me. Sophie spilled juice. "My dress is silk, Grayson. Real silk. I can't hold her right now. Can you clean her up?" I took the wet wipes. I cleaned my niece's face. I distracted Oliver with a magic trick using a coin. They were good kids, mostly. They just had parents who viewed them as accessories rather than human beings. By the time I got back to the main party, dinner was being served. I hadn't eaten all day. There was no seat for me at the main table. There were 30 seats. My parents, Mason, Elena, and 26 guests. "Oh," my father said, spotting me holding a plate of food I'd grabbed from the buffet. "We miscounted the chairs. Just grab a stool at the kitchen island, Grayson. You can hear the speeches from there." I sat on a wooden stool in the kitchen, eating lukewarm lasagna alone, listening to the laughter in the next room. I watched through the open doorway. I saw my father stand up, tapping his champagne flute with a silver spoon, a spoon I had polished. 40 years, my father boomed, his voice full of that charming warmth he turned on for strangers. 40 years of building this life, building this family. He put his arm around my mother. She beamed, looking younger than her 65 years. Mason raised his glass high. Elena rested her head on Mason's shoulder. It was a perfect tableau. The successful patriarch, the devoted wife, the handsome son, the beautiful daughter-in-law. And to celebrate this milestone, my father continued, looking around the room, "Patricia and I have a surprise." The room went quiet. I leaned forward on my stool. "Next week," he announced, "we are taking the entire family to Hawaii. A week at the Four Seasons in Maui. A second honeymoon for us, and a celebration for all of us." The room erupted. People clapped. "How generous!" someone shouted. "Wonderful!" cried another. I felt a sudden, sharp intake of breath in my chest. Hawaii, the Four Seasons. I looked at the calendar in my head. I had just finished the busy tax season. My schedule was open. I could actually go. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of inclusion. Maybe this was it. Maybe the separate seating was just an oversight. Maybe they really wanted me there. I stood up and walked into the dining room. I had a smile on my face, a genuine one. "That sounds amazing, Dad," I said, stepping up to the table during a lull in the applause. "I've always wanted to see Maui. What time is our flight?" The silence that followed wasn't the silence of awe. It was the silence of a car crash. My father's smile didn't drop, but his eyes changed. They went flat. He looked at my mother, then back at me. He looked at me with a mix of pity and irritation, like I was a dog that had jumped onto the sofa. "Grayson," he said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "You don't need to know the flight time." "I don't understand," I said. "You said the whole family." "You're not part of this trip," he said. I felt the blood drain from my face. I could feel the heat rising in my neck. "What? Someone has to stay behind." My mother chimed in, her voice light and airy, as if explaining why we were out of milk. "Mason and Elena need a real vacation. They work so hard. They need time to reconnect as a couple." "And the kids?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Exactly," my father said, pointing his finger at me. "You're staying here. You'll stay at the house and watch Oliver and Sophie. It saves us the cost of a nanny, and the kids are comfortable with you. You want me to babysit? While you all go to a 5-star resort." "It's not just babysitting, Grayson," Elena added, rolling her eyes. "It's family time. You love the kids. I don't see why you're making a face." "You have nothing important to do anyway," my mother said, the final nail. "Your work is flexible. You're always just around." I looked around the room. Mrs. Miller, the neighbor, looked down at her plate. The whispering guest at the end of the table leaned over to her husband. I read her lips. Poor thing. They didn't see a son. They didn't see a man. They saw a servant. They saw a convenience. They saw a fixture in the house like a lamp or a dishwasher, something to be used and ignored until it stopped working. I stood there paralyzed. My father turned back to the guests, raising his glass again. "To family!" he shouted, trying to move past the awkwardness. "To family!" the guests echoed, though their voices were weaker this time. I didn't drink. I turned around and walked back into the kitchen. I leaned against the cold granite counter, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked out the window at Mason's Porsche. Then I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. I looked pathetic, and in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a heavy rope finally fraying apart under too much tension. They thought I was just Grayson, the accountant. Grayson, the free babysitter. But they didn't know everything. They didn't know about the emails I had in my pocket. They didn't know about the phone call I had received 3 weeks ago. And they certainly didn't know that the nothing important I did with my time was about to make me more money in one night than Mason made in a year. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the party continue. The humiliation was a physical weight, heavy in my gut. But strangely, as the shock wore off, it was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't new. This was just the loudest version of a song they had been playing my entire life. Started when I was young. I was the reliable one. Mason was the spirited one. That was the code word. When Mason broke a window, he was spirited. When I got straight A's, I was meeting expectations. I remember my high school graduation. I was valedictorian. I had a speech prepared. That morning, Mason, who was a sophomore, woke up with a stomach ache. Not a fever. Not appendicitis. A stomach ache because he'd eaten too much junk food the night before. My mother stayed home to nurse him. My father dropped me off at the school gate and said, "We'll wait for the video, son. Someone needs to be with your brother." I gave my speech to a sea of strangers. When I looked out into the audience, searching for my family, I saw empty chairs. After college, I became a CPA, a certified public accountant. It was a solid, respectable career. My parents nodded when I told them. "Good," my father had said. "We'll need someone to handle the estate taxes eventually." That was it. No, proud of you. Just a calculation of my future utility. Mason, on the other hand, barely scraped through a state college and immediately declared himself an entrepreneur. My father handed him the seed money for his first venture, a craft brewery that never brewed a single bottle. Then it was a tech startup that had no code. Then a real estate firm. And who cleaned up the mess? I did. For the last 5 years, I have done my parents' taxes. I have done Mason's taxes. I have done the corporate filings for Mason's LLCs. I did it all for free. Family discount, my father called it. Last April, I sat down with Mason to go over his returns. "Mason," I had said, pointing at the ledger, "you're bleeding money. This lease on the Porsche? You can't write this off as a business expense. You're not a realtor anymore. And these dinners? $5,000 in sushi." Mason had laughed, leaning back in my office chair. A chair I paid for. "Relax, Gray. You're the magician. Make it disappear. That's what Dad says you're good at." "I'm not a magician. I'm an accountant. If the IRS audits you, you're going to jail. Or you're paying massive penalties." "They won't audit me," he said dismissively. "I'm small potatoes. Just fix it. Elena wants to go to Aspen this winter, and I need the refund to look good." I fixed it. I always fixed it. I legally minimized his liability, worked loopholes until I was dizzy, and saved him thousands. He didn't even say thank you. He just took the refund check and bought Elena a diamond bracelet. But there was another side to my life. A side they knew nothing about. 3 years ago, after a brutal breakup with a woman who told me I was too nice and too boring, I started walking the city at night. Couldn't sleep. I found an old Canon DSLR in a pawn shop. It was battered. The lens ring was loose, but the glass was clean. I started taking pictures. I didn't photograph sunsets or pretty buildings. I photographed men like me, the invisible men. The janitor smoking a cigarette in the alley at 2 a.m., his face illuminated by the cherry of the tobacco. The construction worker eating a sandwich on a steel beam, legs dangling over the chaos of traffic. The tired fathers on the subway, holding sleeping children, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. I called the series Invisible Men. I posted them on Instagram under a pseudonym, Shadowboxer. I didn't expect anything. It was just a way to scream without making a sound. But people started to listen. First, it was a few hundred likes, then thousands, then comments like, "This made me cry," or "I see my father in this," or "This is exactly how I feel every day." I had 45,000 followers. My family didn't know. To them, Instagram was for Elena to post pictures of her brunch or for my mother to stalk her friends' vacations. They never looked at art. Then, 3 weeks ago, the same week my parents must have been booking this Hawaii trip, I got the email. Subject: Representation Inquiry, Coastal Light Gallery. My hands had shaken when I opened it. It was from Marcus Coleman. If you know photography, you know Marcus Coleman. He runs the most prestigious gallery in Carmel by the Sea, California. He discovers legends. Dear Shadowboxer, your work haunts me. It is raw, masculine, and incredibly tender. I have a slot opening next month for a solo exhibition. I want to fly you out. I want to represent you. Please tell me you are real. I hadn't replied. Why? Because I was afraid. Because the voice in my head, the voice that sounded exactly like my father, said, "Don't be ridiculous. You're an accountant. You're not an artist. Artists starve. Artists are irresponsible." I had drafted a rejection email 10 times. I was going to send it tomorrow. I was going to stay in Boston, watch my niece and nephew, do my work, and continue being the good, invisible son. But standing in that kitchen, watching the backs of my family as they celebrated leaving me behind, something shifted. The invisible men in my photos, they had dignity. They worked hard. They bore their burdens with silence, yes, but they had souls. My family didn't see my soul. They didn't even see my labor. They just saw a machine that dispensed tax returns and babysitting services. Elena walked into the kitchen, snapping me out of my thoughts. She was holding an empty wine bottle. "Grayson, we're out of the Pinot Grigio. Check the cellar. And hurry. Mrs. Miller is asking for a refill." She didn't apologize for the Hawaii announcement. She didn't look embarrassed. She just wanted her wine. "Elena," I said. "What?" "The wine, Grayson. Do you know how much a nanny costs for a week in Boston?" She frowned, confused by the question. "I don't know. Expensive. That's why you're doing it. Look, don't be petty. Dad already decided." "Dad decided," I repeated. "Yes, now get the wine." She turned on her heel, her silk dress swishing around her legs. I went to the cellar, but I didn't get the wine. I stood in the cool darkness, surrounded by dust and vintage bottles my father collected but never drank. I pulled out my phone. I opened the email form Marcus Coleman. It was still in my drafts folder. I hit edit. I deleted the polite refusal I had written. My thumbs moved quickly, typing before I could lose my nerve. "Mr. Coleman, I am real. My name is Grayson Dixon. I can be in Carmel in 5 days. Let's do the show." Sent. I stared at the screen. The little whoosh sound of the email sending felt louder than the party upstairs. I had just committed to crossing the country. I had just committed to a new life. But I wasn't free yet. I still had to survive the night. And I still needed to know exactly how deep the rot in this family went. I needed evidence. Because I knew them. When I left, they would paint me as the villain. They would tell everyone I abandoned them, that I was unstable, that I was cruel to the children. I needed insurance. I walked back upstairs, empty-handed. Elena was waiting. "Where is the wine?" "We're out," I lied. "I checked every rack." She huffed. "Useless. Fine, I'll drink the Merlot. The party dragged on until midnight. I cleaned plates. I took out trash bags heavy with lobster shells and half-eaten cake. I watched my father shake hands and accept congratulations for 40 years of a marriage that was mostly performative. When the last guest finally left, the house fell into a messy silence. My parents went upstairs, exhausted. Mason and Elena collapsed on the sofas in the living room. "Hey, Gray," Mason called out, his voice slurring slightly. "Don't forget to run the dishwasher before you head out. And be here by 8 a.m. tomorrow. We have a lot of packing to do, and Oliver needs a ride to soccer practice." "Sure," I said. 8 a.m. I waited until they went up to the guest suite. I waited until the house was dark. I should have just left. But I needed one thing. My mother had asked me to email a vendor earlier in the day using her laptop, which was sitting on the kitchen counter. I knew she never logged out of her email. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark kitchen. I was about to close the tab when I saw my name in the subject line of a recent email thread. Subject: Hawaii Logistics/Grayson. It was a thread between my mother and Elena, dated 3 days ago. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I knew I shouldn't read it. I knew it would hurt. But after tonight, I needed to know the full price of my admission into this family. I clicked. The blue light of the laptop screen felt like an interrogation lamp in the dark kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, a low drone that matched the ringing in my ears. I read the email chain from the bottom up. From Patricia Dixon to Elena Hartley. Date: Tuesday, 10:15 a.m. Elena, darling, don't worry about the childcare budget for the trip. Harold and I agree we'll just leave Grayson behind. He can stay at the house with Oliver and Sophie. He doesn't have anything important going on. His little accounting clients can wait. It's like having free help, and honestly, he should be grateful we give him a purpose. He's always so mopey. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Mopey, free help, purpose. I scrolled up to Elena's reply. From Elena Hartley to Patricia Dixon. Date: Tuesday, 10:45 a.m. That's a relief. The nanny agency wanted $2,000 for the week plus overtime. That's insane. That money can go toward the spa treatments instead. Besides, Grayson is a pushover. Just tell him it's a family duty thing. He eats that up. It is kind of sad, honestly, how desperate he is to please you guys. But at least it works out for us. Lol. She laughed out loud about manipulating me, about using my desire for love as a leash. I read the final response from my brother, Mason, who had been CC'd on the thread. From Mason Hartley to Elena Hartley, Patricia Dixon. Date: Tuesday, 11 a.m. Perfect. Make sure he knows he has to do the yard work too while we're gone. The landscaper is charging too much. And tell him to detail the Porsche. I want it clean when we get back. He loves doing menial stuff, makes him feel useful. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. Menial stuff. Pushover. It wasn't just that they used me. It was that they held me in contempt. They mocked me. They sat around digitally laughing at my expense while planning a vacation with money I had helped them save. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went cold. Ice cold. It was the kind of cold that burns. I took clear, high-resolution photos of every single email. I captured the headers, the dates, the timestamps. I captured the LOL and the pushover comments. Then, I went to the browser history and cleared the cache for the last hour. I closed the laptop exactly as I had found it. I looked around the kitchen. There was a pile of dirty dishes in the sink that Mason had told me to wash. There was a list on the counter, Elena's handwriting. I picked it up. Grayson's to-do list: 1. Drop kids at school 8 a.m. sharp. 2. Pick up Mason's dry cleaning. Ticket is on the fridge. 3. Buy specialized dog food for Buster, the vet on Main St. 4. Wash and wax the Porsche. 5. Weed the rose garden. 6. Organize the pantry. 7. No screen time for Oliver. She had written it out like I was an employee on probation. I took a pen from the cup holder. I flipped the list over. On the blank back, I wrote 3 words. Quit. Gray. I left the note on the counter, right next to the car keys for my sedan. I walked out the side door. The night air was crisp. I walked to my car. My 10-year-old Honda. It had a dent in the bumper and the AC didn't work great, but it was mine. It was fully paid off. Unlike Mason's Porsche, the bank didn't own a screw of it. I got in, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. As I pulled onto the street, I looked back at the house one last time. It looked peaceful. Perfect American home. Inside, they were sleeping, dreaming of Hawaii, dreaming of massages and cocktails, secure in the knowledge that Grayson would be there in the morning to handle the mess. I turned onto the main road and accelerated. I drove to my apartment, a small 1-bedroom about 20 minutes away. I didn't sleep. I pulled my suitcases out of the closet. I packed everything that mattered. My camera gear, my lenses, my hard drives containing 5 years of tax records, encrypted, of course, and my portfolio. My clothes. I looked at my lease. It was month to month. I wrote a check for the next 2 months' rent and slid it under the landlord's door with a note that I was vacating immediately. By 4 a.m., my apartment was empty. My life was packed into the trunk and back seat of a Honda Civic. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling. I picked up my phone. I had missed calls from earlier in the day from clients, but I ignored them. I scrolled to D. Ruth's number. Ruth is my mother's younger sister. She is the black sheep, the failure. 20 years ago, she moved to California to open a pottery studio. My mother calls her unstable and hippie trash. I call her the only person in the family who ever sent me a birthday card on time. I hit call. It was 1 a.m. in California. She answered on the second ring. Gray, is everything okay? It's late there. Ruth, I said. My voice cracked. Just once. I'm coming. I'm driving out. There was a pause. Then her voice came through warm and steady. It's about time, honey. Do you have the address? Yes. Drive safe. The key is under the ceramic frog by the door. I'll leave the light on. I hung up. I turned off my location sharing. Then, I did something I had wanted to do for a decade. I blocked my mother. I blocked my father. I blocked Mason. I blocked Elena. I didn't block the house landline, just in case of a true emergency involving the kids. But everyone else? Gone. I put the car in drive and hit the highway. The sun was just starting to crack the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. I wasn't heading to work. I wasn't heading to the grocery store for Elena. I was heading west. For the first time in my life, I wasn't driving toward an obligation. I was driving toward myself. The drive from Boston to Carmel by the Sea is roughly 3,100 miles. It takes about 46 hours of pure driving time. I did it in 4 days. Those 4 days were a blur of truck stops, cheap motel coffee, and changing landscapes. I watched the dense green of New England give way to the flat, endless cornfields of the Midwest. Then came the Rockies, jagged and terrifyingly beautiful. Then the red dust of the desert. Every mile I put between myself and Boston felt like a physical weight being lifted off my chest. I kept my phone off for most of the drive. But every time I turned it on to check the GPS, voicemails would flood in. I didn't listen to them, but the transcriptions popped up on the screen. Mom, Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. Grayson, where are you? The kids are waiting. This isn't funny. Mason, Tuesday, 9:15 a.m. Bro, answer the phone. We're going to miss our flight if you don't get here. Don't be a dick. Elena, Tuesday, 10 a.m. I can't believe you. You are ruining everything. Who is going to watch them? We have reservations. Dad, Wednesday, 7 p.m. This is Harold. You have abandoned your family. Do not expect us to be there when you decide to come crawling back. You are cutting yourself off. I deleted them all. On the afternoon of the 4th day, I hit the Pacific Coast Highway. The ocean opened up on my left, vast and blue and endless. The air smelled different here, saltier, sharper, mixed with the scent of eucalyptus. I pulled up to Ruth's house in Carmel. It was a small cottage covered in ivy, with a kiln in the backyard and wind chimes singing on the porch. Ruth was waiting on the steps. She looked nothing like my mother. She wore loose linen pants and her gray hair was tied back in a messy bun. She hugged me so hard I almost lost my balance. "You look like hell, kid," she said, pulling back to look at my unshaven face and wrinkled clothes. "Good to see you too, Aunt Ruth. Come inside. I made stew. And Marcus is coming over in an hour." "Marcus? Marcus Coleman? Now?" Panic spiked in my chest. "I haven't showered in 4 days. He doesn't care about your smell, Gray. He cares about your eye. Go wash up." I showered, shaved, and put on the only clean shirt I had left, a white Oxford. When I walked into the living room, Marcus Coleman was sitting on Ruth's sofa, drinking herbal tea. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a casual way that cost a fortune. He stood up and extended a hand. "Grayson," he said, "the shadow boxer." "Mr. Coleman," I said, shaking his hand. "Call me Marcus. Your aunt showed me the prints you brought. The ones you sent in the digital portfolio were good. The prints, they are extraordinary." He sat down and opened a leather portfolio. "I'm going to be direct. I don't usually do this for unknowns. But the market is hungry for authenticity. Your work captures the dignity of labor in a way I haven't seen since the 90s. He slid a contract across the coffee table. "I want to launch the exhibition in 2 weeks. Invisible Men, Shadows of Labor. We'll price the large prints at $4,000. I take 40%, you take 60%. I cover all framing and marketing costs." I stared at the numbers. $4,000 for a photograph. I used to charge $300 for a complex tax return that took me 3 days. "Is this real?" I asked. "It's very real," Marcus said. "But there's a condition. You have to be present. You have to talk to the collectors. You have to be the artist, not the accountant. Can you do that?" I thought about my father telling me I had nothing important to do. I thought about Elena handing me the wet wipes. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." I signed the contract. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. I wasn't just sitting around. I was selecting frames, approving lighting, doing interviews with local art blogs. I felt a strange sensation I hadn't felt in years. Respect. People asked for my opinion and then listened to it. But the storm back east hadn't dissipated. It was just gathering strength. I finally pieced together what had happened through texts from Mrs. Miller, the neighbor who had whispered "poor thing" at the party. Apparently, my family didn't go to Hawaii. Without me to watch the kids, and with the nanny agencies fully booked or charging premiums Mason couldn't afford, they had to cancel the trip. The Four Seasons has a strict cancellation policy inside 48 hours. They lost thousands. Elena was furious. Mason was blaming me. My parents were telling anyone who would listen that I had had a mental breakdown and disappeared. Then, 3 days before the exhibition opening, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Is this Grayson Dixon?" A woman's voice. "Yes. This is Susan from Carmel Magazine. We're running a feature on your upcoming show. I wanted to verify a few details. Also, your mother has been calling our office." My blood ran cold. My mother? Yes, she saw the promotion online. She seemed very upset. "She claimed you stole family property?" "I took my camera and my clothes, Susan. That's it." "I figured," Susan said, her voice lowering conspiratorially. She sounded difficult. "Don't worry, we didn't give her your address. But you should know she knows you're here. And she knows about the opening on Friday." I thanked her and hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed in Ruth's guest room. They knew. They weren't just angry. They were coming. I could feel it. My parents couldn't stand to be ignored, and they certainly couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding at something they deemed useless. I went to Marcus. "They might come," I told him. "My family." Marcus smiled, a shark-like grin that made me realize why he was so successful. "Let them come, Grayson. Controversy sells art. But more importantly, Are you ready to face them? Not as their servant, but as a man. I touched the pocket of my jacket, where I kept the printed screenshots of the emails. I'm ready, I said. Friday night arrived. The Coastal Light Gallery was transformed. The walls were painted a stark, crisp white, and the lighting was precision-engineered to make my photographs pop. There were 15 pieces on display. Large, black and white prints. The janitor, the construction worker, the tired father. Guests started arriving at 7 p.m. These weren't my parents' friends. Suburbanites trying to outdo each other with lawn care. These were serious people. Collectors from San Francisco, tech moguls from Silicon Valley, critics from LA. I stood near the center of the room, wearing a tailored navy suit Marcus had helped me pick out. I held a glass of sparkling water. Grayson, a woman with silver hair and an elegant demeanor, approached me. This was Mrs. Peyton. Marcus had told me about her. She was old money, real old money, the kind that built universities and libraries. Mrs. Peyton, I said. This piece, she said, gesturing to the photograph of the subway father. The exhaustion in his eyes, but the way he holds the child. It's remarkably tender. It reminds me of my own father returning from the war. I'd like to buy it. I blinked. That piece was priced at $4,500. I would be honored, Mrs. Peyton. It's sold, she said firmly, and I'd like to discuss commissioning you for a portrait of my husband. I was about to thank her when the heavy glass doors of the gallery burst open. The hum of conversation in the room died down instantly. Standing in the entrance was the Dixon clan. They looked disheveled. My father was wearing a blazer that was wrinkled from travel. My mother's hair was frizzy, her face flushed red. Mason looked furious, and Elena looked like she was about to cry, holding a sleeping toddler on her hip. They scanned the room like predators looking for prey. Grayson! My mother's voice shattered the gallery's sophisticated atmosphere. It was the same tone she used to yell at me for tracking mud in the kitchen. Marcus stepped forward, signaling security to hold back. He looked at me. I nodded. Let them in. They marched toward me. The crowd parted, sensing the drama. Mom, Dad, I said, keeping my voice calm. This is a private event. Private, my father sputtered. You ungrateful. Do you have any idea what you've done? I pursued my career, I said. Career? Mason scoffed, stepping up to me. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just standing straighter. You call this a career? Taking pictures of bums? You ruined our vacation, man. We lost the deposit. Elena has been having migraines all week because of the stress. I need you to come home, Grayson, Elena whined, shifting the baby. Now, I'm pregnant again. Okay? We just found out. I can't handle Oliver and Sophie alone, and Mason is busy with the business. You need to come back and help. We'll forgive you for running away if you leave right now. The audacity hung in the air. They didn't even look at the art. They didn't see the red sold dot next to the photograph behind me. They just saw their runaway servant. Forgive me? I asked. You want to forgive me? Don't be difficult, my mother snapped. We're family. Family helps each other. You've had your little tantrum. Now pack your things. We have a flight back to Boston tomorrow morning. I looked around the room. The guests were watching. Mrs. Peyton was watching, her eyes narrowed. I'm not going back, Mom, I said. I'm not your babysitter. I'm not your accountant. And I'm certainly not your free help. Excuse me? My mother stepped back, clutching her pearls. How dare you speak to me like that? After everything we've done for you? We gave you a home. We gave you a purpose. A purpose, I repeated. Is that what you call it? I reached into my inner suit pocket. I pulled out my phone. I had connected it to the gallery's Bluetooth sound system earlier for the background music. I paused the music. What are you doing? Mason asked aggressively. Clarifying my purpose, I said. I opened the microphone app, but then I decided against it. I didn't need a mic. My voice was strong enough. You say I'm family, I said to the room. addressing the guests but locking eyes with my father. But family doesn't talk about each other the way you do. I pulled out the folded printouts of the emails. 3 weeks ago, I said, holding up the paper, I found this email thread. From Patricia Dixon to Elena Hartley. Grayson, don't you dare. My father warned, stepping forward. I read loud and clear. Email from Mom. Keep Grayson here to watch the kids. He doesn't have anything important to do anyway. It's like having free help. He should be grateful we give him something to do. A gasp rippled through the room. My mother went pale. And the reply from Elena, I continued, turning to my sister-in-law. It is kind of sad, honestly, how desperate he is to please you guys. But at least it works out for us. LOL. Stop it, Elena shrieked. That's private. And finally, from my brother Mason, I looked at him. Make sure he details the Porsche. I want it clean when we get back. He loves doing menial stuff. I lowered the papers. The silence in the gallery was heavy, suffocating. I am not your free help, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. I am an artist. And tonight, in this room, I have sold 3 photographs. I have made more money in 2 hours than I made doing your taxes for 5 years. You hacked my email, my mother stammered, trying to find a victim angle. This is illegal. You're unstable. He's a fraud, Mason shouted, trying to regain control. This isn't art. It's garbage. He's just a loser accountant playing pretend. Excuse me. The voice cut through the noise like a diamond cutter. Mrs. Peyton stepped forward. She stood between me and Mason. She was a foot shorter than him, but she looked 10 feet tall. Who are you? Mason sneered. I am Agatha Peyton, she said. And I just purchased that piece for $4,500. Mason's jaw dropped. $4,500? For a picture. For art, Mrs. Peyton corrected. Something you clearly know nothing about. And judging by your behavior, and that cheap suit, I'd wager that Porsche your brother mentioned is a lease you can barely afford. Mason turned red. You don't know who I am. I'm an investor. You're a bore, Mrs. Peyton said. You are interrupting a distinguished event. I suggest you leave before security escorts you out. You are embarrassing this young man, and frankly, you are embarrassing yourselves. My father looked around. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the wealthy, influential people he had always desperately wanted to impress. He saw the disgust. His social currency was evaporating in seconds. Grayson, my father said, his voice low and threatening. If you don't come with us right now, you are out of the will. You are out of the family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me I wasn't part of the trip. Dad, I said, I was never in the family. I was just in the house. Get out, Marcus Coleman said, stepping up beside me. Security guards appeared at the door. My mother burst into tears. Loud, theatrical tears. My son has been brainwashed. My father grabbed her arm. We're leaving, Patricia. They turned and fled. Mason glared at me one last time, hatred burning in his eyes, before following them out. As the door closed behind them, the room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then Mrs. Peyton began to clap. Slowly at first. Then Marcus joined in. Then the whole room. They weren't clapping for the photos. They were clapping for me. The adrenaline crash hit me about 20 minutes after they left. My hands started shaking so bad I had to set my water glass down on a pedestal. Ruth was there instantly. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arm around my shoulders and squeezed. You did good, Gray, she whispered. You did real good. Marcus walked over, holding a slip of paper. He looked pleased. No, he looked ecstatic. Well, he said, that was dramatic, but effective. We've sold 4 more pieces in the last 10 minutes. People love a story, Grayson. And you just gave them a hell of a story. He handed me the slip. It was a preliminary sales receipt. Total sales, $14,000. Artist share, 60%, $8,400. I stared at the number, $8,400. That was 3 months of rent. That was freedom. This is real, I asked. The check will be cut on Monday, Marcus said. Go get some air. You look like you're about to pass out. I nodded and walked toward the front entrance. I needed the cool ocean breeze. But when I stepped outside onto the sidewalk, they were waiting. My family hadn't left. They were standing near the curb, huddled around a rental sedan that was far less impressive than Mason's Porsche. My mother was wiping her eyes with a tissue. My father was pacing. Mason was smoking a cigarette aggressively. When they saw me, they straightened up. Grayson, my father said. His tone had changed. It wasn't the booming voice of the patriarch anymore. It was tighter, desperate. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, I said. Leaning against the brick wall of the gallery, I felt surprisingly calm. The worst had happened, the confrontation, and I was still standing. Don't be ridiculous, my mother said, sniffing. We're your parents. We drove to the airport, flew 6 hours, and drove another 2 just to find you. We were worried sick. You weren't worried, I said. You were inconvenienced. There's a difference. Look, Gray. Mason stepped in, tossing his cigarette butt on the sidewalk. Enough is enough. You made your point. You embarrassed us in front of those snobs. Congrats. Now let's be realistic. You can't live here. You don't have a job. You don't have a place to stay. I have a contract with this gallery, I said, and I'm staying with Ruth. Ruth, my mother scoffed. She's a bad influence. She always has been. She'll turn you against us. You did that yourselves, Mom. Elena spoke up from the car, where she had put the sleeping kids. Grayson, seriously, the tax deadline is coming up for the business. You have all the files. You have the passwords. Even if you're mad, you can't just leave us hanging. The IRS letters, I don't understand them. I looked at Mason. He shifted uncomfortably. Ah, I said. So that's it. It's not just the babysitting. It's the audit risk. It's not an audit, Mason said quickly. Just some questions about the depreciation schedule on the car. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Mason, I told you last year that the Porsche didn't qualify as a heavy utility vehicle for the business deduction. You told me to make it disappear. I didn't. I filed it correctly because I wasn't going to lose my license for your vanity. Mason's face went white. You what? I filed it correctly. If you tried to claim it differently on the amended return you filed yourself, well, that's tax fraud. And I'm not fixing it. You have to, he said, stepping closer, his fists clenched. You're the accountant. Not anymore, I said. I quit. Remember the note. Grayson, please. My mother pleaded, changing tactics again. We're family. Don't ruin your brother. He has a baby on the way. Just come home. Help us sort this out and we can discuss boundaries. Boundaries? I asked. Mom, you emailed that I was free help. You don't want boundaries. You want a servant. I pushed off the wall. I'm done. Do not call me. Do not come to Ruth's house. If you harass me, I will file a restraining order. And Mason, good luck with the audit. I'd suggest selling the Porsche to pay the penalties. You'll regret this, my father shouted as I turned away. You'll fail. And when you do, don't come crying to us. If I fail, I said, looking back over my shoulder, at least it will be my own failure, not yours. I walked back into the gallery. The warmth of the room hit me, the smell of expensive perfume and champagne, the sound of the string quartet playing softly. I saw Ruth talking to Mrs. Peyton. I saw Marcus selling another print to a young couple. I wasn't invisible anymore. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But for the first time in 32 years, the road belonged to me. The first thing I noticed about freedom was the quiet. Back in Boston, silence was something to be feared. Silence meant my mother was brooding over a perceived slight. Silence meant my father was calculating the cost of the heating bill. Silence meant Mason was plotting his next request for money. I used to fill that silence with movement, cleaning, organizing, calculating, fixing. I was a shark that had to keep swimming or else I'd drown in their expectations. But here in Carmel, 6 months after the gallery opening, silence is just peace. I wake up at 6 a.m. now, not because I have a list of chores, but because the light hitting the Pacific Ocean is too beautiful to miss. I rent a small studio apartment 3 blocks from Ruth's place. It isn't a mansion. It doesn't have pillars or a manicured lawn. It has wide plank floors that creak, a large north-facing window, and a smell of salt and turpentine. It is the first place I have ever lived that is entirely mine. My career didn't turn me into a millionaire overnight, but it did something better. It made me sustainable. After the success of Invisible Men, Marcus pushed me to keep shooting. The check for $8,400 was just the beginning. I reinvested half of it into better lenses and printing equipment. I kept the other half in a savings account that no one else had access to. My new series is called Boundaries. It's a study of shorelines. I go out to Big Sur where the cliffs drop violently into the sea. I photograph the exact moment the water hits the rock. It's chaotic, messy, and violent, but the rock stands firm, says, "This is where you stop. This is where I begin." It's a metaphor, obviously, but the collectors love it. I was featured on the cover of Carmel magazine last month. The headline read, "The Artist Who Learned to Say No." I didn't send a copy to Boston, but news travels even when you block the numbers. The grapevine is a powerful thing, especially when it involves Aunt Ruth, who maintains a network of spies, old friends in Boston who were just as tired of my mother's posturing as I was. That's how I found out about the audit. It happened 2 months after I left. Apparently, without me there to act as the buffer between Mason's fantasies and the federal government, Mason had decided to get creative with his tax filing. He tried to claim the family's failed Hawaii trip cancellation fees as a business retreat loss. He tried to claim the lease on the Porsche as a 100% advertising expense. He did exactly what I told him not to do. I heard the details from Ruth one rainy Tuesday morning while we were throwing clay in her studio. "Mrs. Miller called me," Ruth said, centering a lump of clay on the wheel. Mrs. Miller was the neighbor who had whispered "poor thing" at the anniversary party. She said there were IRS agents at the house last week. "Agents?" I asked, looking up from my camera. "Like, field agents?" "2 of them. Apparently, Mason triggered a red flag so bright they could see it from space. They audited 3 years of returns. The years you didn't sign, and the amendment he filed for this year. I felt a phantom twist in my gut, the old anxiety. "Is Dad involved?" "Harold is furious," Ruth said with a grim smile, "because Mason's business was technically registered using the home address. They put a lien on the house until the penalties are paid." "A lien? $70,000 in back taxes and penalties, Grayson. Mason doesn't have it. Elena certainly doesn't have it." I sat down on a stool. $70,000. If I had stayed, if I had bowed my head and polished the silver and done the magic they demanded, I would have found a legal way to mitigate it. I would have spent sleepless nights fixing his mess. I would have absorbed the stress so he could keep driving his status symbol. "What happened to the car?" I asked. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. "Gone. Repossessed last week." Mrs. Miller watched the tow truck drag it out of the driveway. She said Elena was screaming on the front lawn in her bathrobe. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sadistic joy. I just felt relieved. It was the relief of watching a storm destroy a house you no longer live in. "Where are they living?" "They moved into your old room," Ruth said. "Mason and Elena and the 2 kids, all in the guest suite. Elena fired the cleaning lady to save money. Mom is apparently making Elena cook." "Elena doesn't cook," I said. "I know," Ruth laughed. "It's a disaster. And you know what the best part is? They can't blame you. They tried, but everyone knows you've been gone for half a year. This is entirely 100% on them." A week later, I received a letter. Not an email, I had blocked those, but a physical letter forwarded through the gallery. The handwriting was my mother's. It was elegant, looped script that I used to associate with permission slips and birthday cards. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the envelope. My hand hovered over it. Part of me wanted to burn it unopened. That would be the strong move, right? Total detachment. But curiosity is a human flaw. I opened it. Grayson, I saw the magazine. You look different. Older. Harder. Your father's blood pressure is up. The doctor says it's stress. He asks about you even if he won't admit it. Things here are difficult. Mason is going through a hard time. The business climate is unfair, and the government is targeting him. It's a witch hunt. We are getting old, Grayson. We don't have the energy for this chaos. The house is loud. The children are unruly. We miss the quiet. We miss the way things used to run. We are willing to put the past behind us. If you come home for Christmas, we can talk about a fresh start. We won't mention the gallery or the scene you caused. We just want the family whole again. Please, be the bigger person. Mom, I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, looking for the words that weren't there. There was no, I'm sorry. There was no, we were wrong. There was no, we are proud of you. There was only, we are uncomfortable. We miss the quiet. We miss the way things used to run. They didn't miss me. They missed the buffer. They missed the human shock absorber that took the bumps so their ride could be smooth. They missed the silence I provided by swallowing my own voice. Be the bigger person. That was the trap. That phrase is the favorite weapon of the abuser. It translates to, you absorb the blow so I don't have to absorb the guilt. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the fog was rolling in off the ocean, thick and gray. I didn't burn the letter. That would be too dramatic. Instead, I took a red marker from my desk. I circled one sentence. We miss the way things used to run. I wrote underneath it, I don't. Then I put the letter in a file box I kept in the back of my closet labeled, Old Business. I didn't mail it back. Responding would give them supply. It would give them an opening. Silence was the only language they would understand, even if they couldn't interpret it. That afternoon, I met Julia for coffee. Julia was the assistant at the gallery. A sharp-witted woman with paint-stained fingernails and a laugh that made you want to tell her your secrets. We had been spending time together. Nothing official yet, but there was an easiness to it. I ordered a black coffee. She ordered a chai latte. You look heavy today, she said, studying my face. Bad editing session? No, I said. Just a reminder of where I came from. The Boston crew? Yeah. A letter. She didn't ask to see it. She didn't press for details. She just reached across the table and tapped my hand. You know, she said, my dad used to say that you can't look in the rearview mirror and drive forward at the same time. You'll crash. I'm not crashing, I said. I'm just checking the blind spot. Is there anything there? I thought about Mason living in my old room, fighting with Elena over who would cook dinner. I thought about my father guarding his retirement fund while the IRS circled like vultures. I thought about my mother, sitting in her perfect living room, realizing that her golden child was actually fool's gold. No, I said, smiling at Julia. The road behind me is empty. They're stuck at the last exit. Good, she said, lifting her cup, because I got news. Marcus wants to send Boundaries to a gallery in London. Next spring. London, Grayson. You're going global. I looked at her, and then I looked out the window at the town that had taken me in. London. A year ago, my world was the size of my parents' kitchen. Now, it was expanding faster than I could keep up. I realized then that the new dawn wasn't just a metaphor. The sun had actually risen. The long, cold night of my servitude was over. And the man sitting in this coffee shop, the man drinking coffee he paid for, with a woman who liked him for his mind, discussing a career he built with his own hands, that man was solid. He was visible, and he was never going back. There is a spot on Highway 1, just south of Carmel, where the land gives up its fight with the ocean and simply crumbles into the surf. It's my favorite place to think. I drove out there today with my camera. It's been a year since the anniversary party. A full rotation of the sun. I sat on the hood of my car. I traded the Honda sedan for a used Subaru Outback that can handle the dirt roads better. and looked at the horizon. A year ago, I was standing in a pantry, holding a tray of shrimp, being told to stay invisible. Today, I am holding a contract for an exhibition in London and a lease for a larger studio space downtown. But the biggest change isn't the money. It isn't the car. It isn't even the art. It's the silence in my head. For 32 years, there was a voice in my mind that sounded like my father. It said, "You aren't enough. You are a utility. You are only valuable when you are serving someone else." That voice is gone. It has been replaced by my own voice. And my voice says, "I am here." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened my photo gallery and scrolled all the way back. Past the photos of the cliffs, past the photos of Julia laughing at dinner, past the photos of the gallery opening. I scrolled back to a date 3 years ago. There was a photo I had taken in the mirror of my parents' bathroom. I was wearing a suit I hated. My eyes were dark circles. My shoulders were slumped. I looked like a ghost haunting his own life. I remember taking that photo because I wanted to see if I still had a reflection. I felt so transparent that day I wasn't sure I existed. I looked at that man. I felt a wave of pity for him. He was so tired. He was so desperate for a crumb of affection that he would starve himself to feed people who were already full. I pressed select. I pressed the trash can icon. Delete photo. This action cannot be undone. I pressed delete. The photo vanished. Felt like a ritual. A final severing of the cord. That man doesn't exist anymore. He died the night he walked out of that kitchen. I picked up my camera. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple, colors my mother would have called garish, but which I found breathtaking. I looked through the viewfinder. I adjusted the focus. I wasn't looking for invisible men anymore. I wasn't looking for boundaries. I turned the camera around. I held it at arm's length. I didn't smile. I don't have a cheese smile. I just looked into the lens, directly into the glass. Click. I checked the display. The man in the photo had windblown hair. He had lines around his eyes from squinting at the sun. He looked weathered. He looked real. This wasn't a selfie. It was a portrait of a survivor. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ruth. "Dinner at 7? Marcus is bringing wine. Julia is bringing dessert." I typed back, "I'll bring the main course." I put the car in gear. I didn't look back at the ocean. I didn't need to. I knew it would be there tomorrow. Just like I knew I would be there tomorrow. My family in Boston is probably sitting down to dinner right now. Maybe they are eating takeout because Elena can't cook. Maybe Mason is complaining about the bus he has to take to work. Maybe my father is staring at his diminished bank account, wondering why the math doesn't work anymore. They are living in a prison of their own making. They built the walls out of pride and barred the windows with ego. I am not their warden anymore. I am not their key. I drove back toward the lights of Carmel. Toward art. Toward Ruth. Toward Julia. Toward a life that was messy and imperfect and entirely wonderfully mine. I am Grayson Dixon. I am an artist. And for the first time in my life, when I look in the mirror, I like who looks back. The story of Grayson Dixon is not just a drama about a wealthy family and a neglected son. It is a textbook example of a toxic family dynamic known as the golden child versus scapegoat system. In this dynamic, narcissistic parents choose one child, Mason, to project their ambitions and idealized self-image onto, while the other child, Grayson, is chosen to absorb the family's stress, responsibilities, and failures. Grayson also suffered from parentification, where a child is forced to act as a parent to their own siblings or even their parents, fulfilling emotional or logistical needs at the expense of their own development. The most important lesson here is that boundaries are not punishments. They are protection. When Grayson left, he didn't do it to hurt his family. He did it to save himself. His family's subsequent collapse wasn't his fault. It was the natural consequence of their own incompetence, which Grayson had been shielding them from for years. Your worth is intrinsic. It is not based on how useful you are to others. You are not a utility or free help. If you are in a relationship, romantic, familial, or professional, where your presence is ignored but your absence is punished, you are being exploited. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family or workplace? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved to save your own sanity? If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below with the word good, so I know these lessons reached you. Or, tell me your own moment of clarity. What was the final straw that made you say, I quit? Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, you have the right to be seen. You have the right to leave. And you have the right to build a life that belongs to you.